Sure. Here is section 1 of the story, 1,500 words, written as a direct, first-person narrative in the style of a Reddit infidelity confession. The tone is honest, emotional, and direct, with no unnecessary fluff. I've been married for over 25 years. I guess, on paper, it looks like a success. We raised a son together, stayed loyal, at least in the way society defines loyalty, and kept our promises. But I think somewhere along the line, we stopped seeing each other. Or maybe we just stopped looking. My name doesn't matter, not here. But I'm a woman in my early 50s, and I used to be beautiful. At least that's what people told me when I was younger. My husband used to say it too. He'd touch my back in the kitchen, or whisper something into my ear when we were out with friends. That version of us feels like a dream now, like something I hallucinated in my 20s.
Now?
Now, he barely looks up from his phone during dinner. The only thing he really comments on these days is the news, or how the neighbor's dog barks too much. If I change my hair, he doesn't notice. If I wear something tight, I get a quick glance followed by a distracted grunt. We sleep on our own sides of the bed. No fights. No drama. Just silence. A soft, constant silence that kills you in slow motion. Our son, Julian, is in his late 20s now. He's a freelance photographer, very talented. Not the path we expected him to take, but he's made it work, and I'm proud of that. He lives in the same city, visits every couple of weeks, sometimes more. We've always been close, closer than I am with my husband. Julian actually talks to me, you know? He sees me. A few months ago, he asked me to do something unusual. We were sitting on the back patio. It was spring and the light was soft golden. He looked up from his camera and said, "Mom, I've been thinking. I want to do a portrait series, mature beauty, real women, real bodies. Not retouched, not posed.
Raw.
Honest. You'd be perfect for it." I laughed at first, assuming he was joking. But he wasn't. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "I'm serious. You're still beautiful. People need to see that." It took me a few days to say yes. Not because I didn't want to. Deep down, I think I was desperate to say yes, but because I didn't know if it was right. Something about the idea felt indulgent. I hadn't been photographed in years, and certainly not in a way that focused on my body. But something in me stirred. Something old and forgotten. I said yes. The first shoot was simple. Just natural light, soft tones, no makeup. I wore a plain white blouse and jeans. Julian shot with film, said it made everything feel more intentional. His assistant, Aiden, was there too, a guy in his early 30s probably. Kind eyes, calm energy. Professional.
Polite.
But there was something else in the way he looked at me, like I wasn't invisible. That first day, I felt nervous, but alive. It's hard to explain if you've never felt invisible for a long time. Suddenly, I was being studied. Not in a creepy way, not even in a sexual way, at least not overtly, but like I mattered. Like there was something interesting in my face, my posture, the lines in my hands. Julian kept the direction simple. "Just be," he said. So I was. We did more sessions after that. Each one, I felt a little bolder. I'd wear something a bit more fitted. I'd smile less, let the camera capture me, as I was. Some of the shots were intense, close-ups of my eyes, my collarbone, my arms. I started paying attention to my body again, to how I moved. I hadn't done that in years. Aiden became more involved with each shoot. He adjusted lighting, suggested poses, fetched coffee. He was warm, respectful, never overstepped, but his presence made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time.
Desired.
One day, after the third session, we were all cleaning up when Julian got a call and stepped outside. Aiden and I were alone in the studio, folding backdrops. He looked at me and said, "You know, you have the kind of face people remember, even more than the young models." I laughed, a little flattered, a little embarrassed. He smiled but didn't look away. That night, I tried telling my husband about the shoot. I showed him one of the photos, one where the light hit me just right, making me look younger but not fake. He glanced at it and said, "Looks like something out of a magazine ad." "Who's it for?" I told him it wasn't for anything. Just for me. He shrugged. Weird thing to do with your son, he said, then turned back to the TV. Something broke in me then. Or maybe something finally woke up. I didn't want to have an affair. That's not what this is about. I wasn't out looking for attention. But the loneliness had been sitting inside me for years, building quietly. And now, someone was offering me a way to feel seen again. Not as a mother, not as a wife, but as a woman. Aiden started texting me after sessions. At first, it was about logistics, scheduling, ideas for themes. Then it turned personal. He'd say things like, "You looked amazing today," or "That color really brings out your eyes." I told myself it was harmless. I didn't initiate. I didn't flirt. But I didn't stop him either. Julian mentioned he wanted to do a more intimate series, something less about form, more about vulnerability. Maybe at my house, where I'd be comfortable. He said it would be low light, natural, very raw. I agreed. Aiden came with him, of course. He helped set up in our bedroom. My husband was on a business trip. We moved some things around, made the room look soft, warm. The curtains were open just enough to let in sunset light. I wore a long, silk robe. Not revealing, but suggestive, tasteful. Julian kept the direction simple again, then left me and Aiden in the room while he adjusted equipment. Aiden looked at me differently that day. He didn't say anything inappropriate, but the space between us felt heavy, charged. When he handed me a glass of water, our fingers brushed, and I felt it like an electric jolt. After the session, Julian left early. Something about needing to upload files. Aiden stayed back to help me put the room back together. We worked in silence, both aware, neither acknowledging the shift. Just as he was about to leave, he turned to me and said, "You should be photographed like this all the time." He stopped himself, smiled softly, and left. I didn't sleep that night. It wasn't about Aiden, not entirely. It was about being wanted. About being more than a placeholder in someone else's story. I wasn't planning anything. But for the first time in decades, I was starting to feel like the main character again. And I didn't know what to do with that. Let me know when you're ready for section 2, or if you'd like the next part to follow a slightly different tone or pacing. The photos turned out better than I expected. I looked, not young but powerful. Soft but not weak. There was something in my eyes, maybe a version of me that had been buried under routine and repetition. Julian was proud of the shots. He said they had real emotion, real weight. He was excited to submit them to a gallery exhibit. I nodded and smiled, but the only thing I could think about was how I didn't recognize myself in the best possible way. The next few shoots pushed boundaries. We didn't talk about it like that, but that's what was happening. The clothes became looser. The expressions more exposed. I didn't even question it anymore. I wanted it. Not for the camera. For myself. Aiden was always there. He was different from most young men. There was no arrogance, no forced charm. He paid attention. He listened. When I talked about music, he remembered the songs. When I made a joke, he laughed like he meant it. When I wore something new, his eyes told me before his mouth did. It wasn't long before the messages at night became something I looked forward to. At first, I waited for him to initiate. Then I started replying with more than I should have. I told myself it wasn't cheating. It was just texting. Everyone does it. Nothing happened. But it had. Every word between us carried an undertone. A weight. A possibility. At home, I tried harder. I dressed up for dinner. I cooked his favorite meals. I tried to start conversations. He didn't notice. I brought up the gallery exhibit. He grunted, said something about not understanding art crap, then changed the subject to yard maintenance. That night, he fell asleep beside me in less than 5 minutes. I lay awake wondering if I'd have to live like this forever. Quiet, unwanted, slowly disappearing. Aiden asked if I'd like to join him for a casual dinner to celebrate the success of the last shoot. He called it low-key and totally platonic. I didn't say yes right away. I waited an hour, then replied, "Sure. That sounds nice." The night of the dinner, I spent more time getting ready than I'd care to admit. I told myself it was because I hadn't been out in a while. I told myself it was harmless. I wore a simple black dress. Tasteful. Elegant. When I walked into the restaurant and saw his eyes widen slightly, I felt something bloom inside me. Not vanity. Not pride. Something deeper. Recognition. We talked for hours. Not just about photography.
About life.
Family. Mistakes. Regret. He didn't talk like a younger man. He talked like someone who'd lived and lost already. We didn't touch. Not once. But everything in me felt touched. Stirred. Moved. He walked me to my car. I turned to thank him. He leaned in, paused, and then stepped back. Sorry, he said. I just never mind. I went home buzzing. Guilt tapped at the edge of my mind, but I shut the door on it. Nothing had happened. Julian started prepping the gallery submissions. He was excited, kept saying how proud he was. I pretended to be fully present, but I kept thinking about how far I'd come from the woman I was 3 months ago. How far I might still go. Aiden kept texting. He'd send me candid shots he took when Julian wasn't looking. Unposed. Vulnerable. Intimate. I'd stare at them late at night, tracing the lines of my own face like it belonged to someone else. My husband saw one of the photos on my phone once. He asked, "Why do you keep looking at those? You don't need to obsess." I said nothing. He didn't deserve the explanation. One afternoon, Aiden sent me a photo of myself laughing. I had my head tilted back, eyes half closed, pure joy on my face. He captioned it, "You look like freedom."
I stared at it for a long time.
I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The next time we had a shoot, it was in an old industrial loft Julian had rented for its natural lighting. It was just the three of us, as usual. But this time, Julian left halfway through for another appointment. It was planned. I think he even told me earlier, but I'd forgotten. When it was just Aiden and me, something shifted. It was quiet. He offered me water. Complimented the way I held my posture in one of the shots. I laughed, told him it was all just muscle memory now. He didn't look away. "You don't realize what you do to a room, do you?" he asked, voice low. I froze. Not because I was shocked, but because I wanted to hear more. No one had spoken to me like that in decades. Not since before I was a mother. Not since before I became invisible. "It's not just beauty," he continued. "It's presence. You walk in and something changes." I should have stopped him. I should have left the room. But I didn't. I let him talk. I let myself feel it. I let myself believe it. He took a step closer. I could smell the clean, faint scent of cologne. He didn't touch me, but I could feel him thinking about it. I could feel myself hoping he would. When I got home that night, I didn't speak to my husband. I didn't have the energy to pretend anymore. The texts from Aiden became bolder. Still careful, but edged with heat. He told me he thought about me outside of work. That he respected me too much to cross a line. That he didn't want to make me uncomfortable. That he couldn't help how he felt. I told him I was confused. That I didn't know what I wanted. That I shouldn't feel this way. He said he understood. That he wouldn't push. That I should do whatever made me feel alive. The next shoot was scheduled for a Sunday. Julian had to cancel last minute. Aiden offered to still go through with it if I was comfortable. I said yes. I told myself I just wanted to finish the set. I told myself nothing would happen. I wore a cream sweater that hung off one shoulder. He adjusted the lighting gently, brushing my hair out of my face. His fingers were warm. He asked me to close my eyes. He said, "Just breathe. Think of something that makes you feel powerful." I thought of him. When I opened my eyes, he was standing closer. Still not touching. Still waiting. I whispered, "You're making this hard." He said, "Tell me to stop and I will." I didn't. I didn't stop him. I didn't move. I didn't speak. But something in my body shifted, relaxed in a way that felt like surrender. I wasn't thinking of consequences. I wasn't thinking about my marriage or guilt or what kind of woman I was becoming. I was only aware of the air between us, charged and heavy, and the way he was looking at me like I was the only person that had ever existed in front of him. He leaned in slowly, still giving me time to say no. I didn't. His lips touched mine, soft at first, tentative, but then real. Firm.
Warm.
I didn't pull away. I let myself feel it. I kissed him back. And I didn't think about the years I'd spent starving. I didn't think about who I was supposed to be. I only thought about how long it had been since someone made me feel like I mattered. The kiss ended, but the silence after said more than anything we could have said aloud. I looked down. He stepped back. We didn't speak. He just nodded once, like he understood everything that had passed between us in that moment. I gathered my things, thanked him, and left. On the drive home, I couldn't stop shaking. My hands gripped the steering wheel like I was afraid I'd float away. My heart felt too loud. And yet, under the storm of adrenaline, there was calm. Like I'd broken through something thick and suffocating. I had crossed a line, and I didn't feel regret. I felt awake. That night, my husband asked if I'd remembered to pay the electricity bill. I said yes. He asked what I made for dinner. I told him leftovers. He nodded, didn't look up. I went to bed early, lay awake in the dark beside him, wondering how many years I'd spent pretending this was enough. Aiden didn't text that night. I think we both needed space. But 2 days later, he sent me a photo from the last shoot. It wasn't from the official set. It was a candid, me leaning against the wall, looking down, hair slightly messy, lips still flushed. He only wrote, "I haven't stopped thinking about this." Neither had I. I responded carefully. "I don't know what this means." He replied, "It means you're human. And so am I." We met again. Not for a shoot. Not under any professional excuse. We just met. At a small hotel in the city, away from anyone who might recognize us. We didn't speak much when I walked in. He took my hand and led me to the bed, and everything after that was soft, slow, unhurried. Like we both knew we couldn't afford to rush something this fragile. It wasn't about lust. It wasn't a frenzy. It was something else entirely. He undressed me like he respected me, like I was sacred, like he had waited a long time to touch someone he didn't want to ruin. After, I cried. Not out of shame, out of release. Years of being unseen, untouched, unloved. All of it poured out quietly while his arms wrapped around me, and he whispered that I deserved to be wanted. We met again the next week. Then again after that. Always quiet, careful. He never pressured, never made promises. He let me set the pace. But each time I saw him, I felt more like myself than I had in decades. At home, I became quieter. Not out of guilt, but because I had nothing left to give there. My husband didn't notice. He was busy planning a fishing trip. He mentioned something about retirement timelines and the possibility of downsizing. I nodded, said whatever he needed to hear. My mind was elsewhere. Julian's gallery exhibit came together quickly. The photos, my photos, were central to the entire collection. He was proud, nervous, kept asking if I was okay with everything. I said I was. What I didn't say was that I felt like I was looking at someone else's life. That the woman on the wall was who I used to be when I was with Aiden, but not the person I returned to every night. The night of the exhibit, I wore a black dress with a high slit. Understated, but powerful. People stared, whispered,
Complimented me.
My husband came, stood beside me the whole night like he was part of the art. He didn't say much, didn't ask how I felt. At one point he muttered, "You look nice," and that was it. Aiden was there too, across the room. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The way he looked at me said everything. We had built something that couldn't exist in public, and we both understood the rules. Later that week, I told him I needed time. Not because I wanted to end it, because I needed to understand what this meant. For me, for my future. He understood. Said he would wait. That he wasn't going anywhere. I spent days in silence, thinking, watching my husband go about his routines, watching myself pretend. I started to wonder if it was fair to him, to Julian, to myself. I started to wonder if it was cowardice to stay in a life where I felt nothing but safe. One night, my husband reached for me in bed. It was mechanical, brief, disconnected. I let him, not because I wanted to, because it felt easier than explaining why I didn't. When it was over, he rolled away, and fell asleep in minutes. I stared at the ceiling and thought, this isn't cheating. This is surviving. I knew then that I couldn't keep living in two versions of myself. The woman in the photographs and the woman in this house couldn't coexist forever. One would have to give. I didn't know which one yet. When Aiden texted me days later, asking if I was okay, I didn't answer right away. I stared at the message, feeling everything and nothing. I thought about ending it, cutting clean, going back to the silence and the safety and the dull ache of a predictable life. But I didn't. I typed slowly, carefully. I'm not okay, but I think I will be. He replied within seconds. I'll be here, whenever you're ready. And I believed him. Weeks passed without seeing him. The silence wasn't clean. It didn't bring peace. It made everything sharper. My home felt colder, my marriage thinner. Every day stretched, routine, and heavy. I went through motions, cooked meals, answered questions, folded laundry, but I was somewhere else entirely. The woman who'd come alive in front of Aiden's lens was fading again, and I could feel it happening like a slow erasure. My husband never asked why I was distant. He either didn't notice or didn't want to. He'd become used to the silence between us, mistaking it for stability. I started watching him the way I might watch a stranger. Polite distance, no investment. When he kissed my cheek, it felt like obligation. When he spoke, I listened like I was checking a box. There was no hate, just a thick, impenetrable indifference. Julian was busy planning his next set. He talked excitedly about moving the work in a new direction. I smiled, nodded, offered support. He asked if I'd model again. I told him I wasn't sure. I didn't say I didn't trust myself to stand in front of that camera without wanting what came after. Aiden reached out once. Just one line. I miss you. I stared at it for hours before responding. I didn't say it back. I just asked, why me? He answered, because you make me want to be better. Because you see the world like it still matters. Because when I'm with you, everything else stops. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I kept the message unread so I could keep returning to it, pretending it was still fresh. Then something shifted. My husband came home one night drunk. Not wildly, just enough to be unfiltered. He sat down at the kitchen table and asked, "Are you happy?" The question came out of nowhere. I didn't answer. He laughed, bitterly. "Didn't think so," he said. "Neither am I." That was the first honest moment we'd had in years. I looked at him, not as a man who betrayed me or failed me, but just a person who had let life wear him down. I saw sadness in his eyes, and I didn't hate him. But I also didn't love him. Not anymore. Maybe not for a long time. I went upstairs that night and didn't sleep. Not because of guilt. Because clarity had finally arrived. I didn't want to live in a half-life. I didn't want to die slowly in a marriage that had already ended, quietly and without violence. I wasn't angry. I was done. I called a lawyer. Asked for information, not action. Took notes, made a list. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just moved forward, step by step, without noise. Aiden and I met for coffee in public this time. I told him everything. That I was leaving. That it wasn't for him, but because of me. He listened, didn't interrupt. When I finished, he took my hand and said, "Whatever happens next, I'm proud of you." I believed him. I didn't move out right away. I stayed a few more weeks, tying loose ends, waiting for the right moment. One night, I told my husband calmly. There was no yelling, just a long, tired pause. He nodded, said, "I figured." He didn't ask about someone else. Maybe he didn't want the truth. Or maybe he already knew. I packed my things over a weekend. I left photos on the wall, memories in drawers. I took only what belonged to me now, clothes, journals, the prints Aiden had given me. My husband didn't help. Didn't stop me. Just sat on the porch and watched. I moved into a small apartment. Nothing extravagant. Just enough space to breathe. The first night alone, I didn't sleep. Not because I was sad. Because I was adjusting to the sound of my own freedom. Aiden came by the next day. Not to stay. Just to see if I was okay. He brought food. We sat on the floor and ate in silence. When he left, he kissed my forehead, not my mouth. He wasn't rushing.
He didn't want to take me.
He wanted me to arrive. Days turned into weeks. I found work, freelance, small projects. I walked more, read more,
Took photos of my own.
started to see beauty in moments I used to ignore. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always easy. But it was mine. Julian called, offered another shoot. I said yes. This time, I brought my own wardrobe. I chose the clothes. I directed the tone. I stood in front of the camera not as a muse, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself from the bones of a life she no longer lived. The photos were different. Not softer. Stronger. Bolder. Like the light inside me had settled instead of flickered. Julian noticed. He said, "You've changed." I said, "I had to." Aiden and I never made it official. There was no rush. No need to define what we were. We saw each other when it felt right. We touched when it meant something. There was no guilt, no pressure. Just presence. I didn't tell many people. Most wouldn't understand. They'd see betrayal, not resurrection. But I knew the truth. I didn't leave because I found someone new. I left because I remembered I existed. And that was enough. One night, Aiden asked if I regretted anything. I thought for a long time before answering. "I regret waiting so long," I said. "But not what I did. Not what I chose." He nodded. "You saved yourself," he said. I believe that too. Months passed. My ex and I spoke only through paperwork. There were no ugly fights, just formality. He never asked for more. I never offered. The past became background noise. Familiar, but no longer loud. I looked in the mirror one morning and realized I didn't dread what I saw. There were lines, yes.
Age, yes.
But there was power too. Something had awakened in me and stayed. Not because of a man, but because I finally let myself want more than survival. I wasn't chasing romance anymore. I wasn't chasing anything. I was choosing. Every day. Deliberately. And that made all the difference. The last photo Aiden took of me was different from all the others. I wasn't posing. I wasn't styled. I was sitting at a cafe, laughing at something he said, eyes half closed, hair messy, coffee cup in hand. He showed it to me and said, "This is the one." I agreed. It wasn't the most flattering, but it was the most honest. It was a portrait of a woman who had burned down the life she was told to love and built something real from the ashes. And this time, I didn't feel like I needed permission to be proud of that.